Welcome to the first series of our Queer As podcast, where we're yarning with queer Indigenous artists and creative practitioners about their work across the public imaginary. I'm Sandy O'Sullivan. I'm a Wiradjuri trans non-binary artist and a professor in the Centre for Critical Indigenous Studies on the Wallumattagal campus of Macquarie University on unceded Darug Noura.
And I'm Han Reardon-Smith, a settler, trans non-binary musicer, radio maker and academic. I've been working with Prof Sandy at the Centre for Critical Indigenous Studies over the past 4 years, while living on unceded Jagera, Yagara-Yugarapul and Turrbal country.
Today we're catching up with queer Mununjali Yugambeh writer EVN, who tells us about their poetry and word work and their journey of expanding into theatre with their play Swim. It's the story of an Indigenous person navigating the colonial project of gender at their pace, one stroke at a time. Really excited to be talking to you. It's been really strange because all the way through you've been underwriting a lot of what we've been thinking. There's a number of people that we've spoken to where that's the case, a small number, but we've written about your work a fair bit because it's had a really strong influence. Obviously, we're thinking about queer mob and that's part of the reason, but it's really, from my perspective, it's the way that your work has found a way. And so I guess what I mean by that is seeing it translate to stage with Swim made all the sense in the world. You know, there's obviously something quite performative about the way that you read poetry, but performance like this kind of narrative form is quite different. And so in that way, I maybe didn't expect it to quite work in the way that it does, but it's like the perfect play. You know, I say that as someone who's a student of theatre, I suppose. I mean, a million years ago, I did do a degree in it. But, you know, it surprises me that something that can be so radical is also really understandable as an engaging theatre piece. So, you know, you did this work on Black queer autonomy and embodiment through sporting practices, which got me thinking about stuff that I haven't thought about for years in terms of how I engaged with the body, and I've heard this from people who've seen Swim. So I wonder what it was like writing about that as someone who's quite committed and really has had these very deep thoughts, but also is really tapping into what a lot of people who maybe haven't had those deep thoughts has been thinking about.
Yeah, it's throwing something out there and seeing the sparks, you know, like seeing the connections. I think it was so interesting working in theatre for the first time, because there's also this thing around theatre having a more general audience, or like, I don't know how to explain it, but like, I guess, yeah, like, you know what I mean? Like, you're sort of meant to write for the everyday person, but who is the everyday person, you know? So yeah, there was always this thing of, well, I want to write for mob, I want to write for trans and gender diverse people, I want to write for queer people, but there's always this thing where it's like, but you also have to, you know, make sure that everyone understands. I'm like, well, what is that, you know? So whereas, you know, writing a book, I feel sometimes you can be more conversational to the people that you want to be talking to. But I think at the same time, it's like really great feedback that the play did speak to you personally, and like, of course, sparked so many ideas and was intimate. But it always like made me feel a little bit tense, thinking like, I don't want to make things more simplistic at risk of like offending or alienating the people that I'm really writing this for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really interesting too, because one of the performances that I saw of it, you know, I caught up with some fairly young teenagers who are queer and trans mob, and their responses to coming out of it, they were really elated. You know, they were really excited. And that's a really interesting response coming out of something that's quite a thoughtful piece that kind of has an arc in it. But it's really great that that was actually their response, I guess. I'm not sure how you feel about that.
Oh, I think I know maybe the young people you're talking about. I think I maybe saw like a picture and it just made me so happy. I also wasn't there every night for the work. So the nights that I were there were really special. But yeah, in some ways it was also a play that myself I could only watch so many times because it also spoke to so much of my personal experience. And theatre is like, with, you know, all of the beautiful creatives that I worked with, you know, like it creates this atmosphere like that's through sound, through visuals, through the body, that just adds like another layer to how hard that storytelling can kind of hit. So I was really, really just happy that so many people, found something in that work, and I hope that we can get it on stage again. The opening night, which was on Gadigal Land, which was so overwhelming, but I remember, do you know Ian Michael, the director? Yeah, he and writer, and he came up to me and he was like, "This is the queer Black classic," and I was like, "Well, that's such a compliment, thank you." And he was like, "This is going to inspire so many more stories." And I was like, well, that's the goal. That's always the goal, to have more work out there.
I think it clearly inspires more stories. I mean, again, what those young people were coming out with was a sense of being seen, but a sense that they can contribute to the world, you know. Absolutely. I mean, I don't know, contribute to the world sounds a bit too much, but you know, feeling like there's a place to belong, and that the people who are there in the audience understand it. And I guess that's one of the really powerful things from my perspective is, you know, there's quite a lot of queer work that talks about things like bathrooms, or talks about things like, you know, access to public spaces. But I don't think it does it in the kind of nuanced way that you get with swim, that's about the journey of a person's life. And, you know, it's not as simple anytime that we talk about something like access to shared public facilities. It's not as simple as a kind of lack of permission. It's more than that. It's much more complex than that. And I think that, in a sense, can only be played out in something like a theatre piece.
Yeah.
But I wondered how you felt about it in relation to, I mean, the work in Personal Score goes into much more complex kind of detail, because it can.
Yeah.
And obviously it's contributing, this might not be obvious to everybody who's listening, but this contributes something that just doesn't exist in any other space.
Yeah, it's like their sibling works, I guess, because they were written around the same time as well. Yeah. And yeah, like you said, that, you know, there's scope in a book that you can't do in a play, and there's also things that you can do in a play that you can't do in a book, obviously. There was just really, there's just so many ideas in that book, and finding a way to sort of weave all of that together was difficult.
I wish and I hope that more people would read Personal Score. I actually think lots of people have read it, but I hope that people read it internationally as well, because I think that it provides not so much solutions as provocations around really thinking about the gender binary and thinking about the implications of how the body works through these difficult sites. I mean, they just are difficult sites. And I know that sometimes people's solutions to it, in fact, I could say that my solution to it, and we've heard this time and again from trans and gender diverse people, is to not participate in physical activity, you know. And what was really interesting about Personal Score is that I reflected recently in something that I wrote, that if it had existed along with swim when I was younger, you know, not to kind of put blame on myself or on the world in that way, but it would have given me so much more.
Yeah, mate. Yeah, that's a story that's been coming out with lots of mob about, sort of like telling me the particular moment or moments where they stopped for whatever reason playing a sport that they really loved or doing an activity that they really loved. yeah, I mean, so, and then sort of finding a way back to it as an older person, or finding, yeah, I guess there's a really common theme around finding community and finding people to participate in sport or physical activity or whatever it is. I think I use it, like, the term sport so broadly in this.
Yeah. As it should be. I think it's been an opt-in, opt-out for a lot of people. This idea of we either love sport, hate sport, especially in the arts, there's been this kind of oppositional framing, of course, that, you're very well...
Which I think is to do, of course, with the kind of colonial containers that kind of place you, you're either this or that there's this exclusivity to a lot of these specializations, and that you can only really engage in these things if you're exceptional, if you're excellent in this particular way, if you're competitive. And so, I know of my own childhood that I definitely didn't identify with being a sporting person, but I'm also quite a person that's in the body, and that opposition that's set up between art making, creativity, and sporting and physical activity is very arbitrary. So yeah,
I think understanding that moment that can happen for people through puberty, where the body betrays you. I'm sorry, maybe this isn't the case for cisgender people, I'm not sure. It stops being what you need it to be to do the work that you always imagined you'd be able to do. Sport, making, thinking about how your body moves through space. And again, I just think there's this moment where you discuss, there's a discussion of, it's not race. It is race, but it's not, it's indigeneity, but it's community, and it's all of these things, but it's within that broader lens. What I felt really powerful about for both texts is that this provides an opportunity for mob who have never thought about this, which is often what I think about with my own work. Sure, I want to write stuff for a queer mob, but actually I want to write stuff for mob who don't get it. Who don't understand. And this really provided some tools. And and that sounds a little bit too much like I'm excavating it for, for its utility. And I don't mean that. I mean, it really, I think it would have sparked conversation for people, and that they could have gotten a better idea than from anything I've ever written. And I love that, because that's like the reason that art is so powerful in this making is that sometimes you need to see it and engage with it and hear it, rather than just hear theoretical descriptions of it.
Thinking with that, the creation of community and the, I guess, particular your own personal understanding of queer Indigenous community and community building, and the work that you've done not only in creating your own works but really contributing to spaces that are making spaces for young mob to start their own practices of storytelling, writing, and otherwise kind of engaging with words, both through editing and through engagement with programs like Black and Write. I'm wondering what this kind of community making means to you, and the work of the edited collections that you've contributed to, in terms of often placing emerging artists alongside more prominent writers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's, young mob, but also older mob. I think it's really important for me to say. And, emerging writers can be emerging writers at any age. I really recognise that it's so important for a younger generation to be encouraged into doing what they want to do and being who they want to be. But also, like, a lot of our older mob, for so many reasons, particularly racism, didn't have the opportunities to do that, or they just might be reaching a time in their life where they want to write their stories down, or they want to write their poems, or they feel a sense of community or urgency around putting their voice out there, or they're gaining that confidence, which is like a huge thing as well. I think it's kind of like what we all do. I've always just wanted to bring people along. Yeah, sort of not be an individual, but be like part of a collective. And I've really seen the literary world change so much in the 15 years that I've been in it. Sometimes it feels almost unrecognizable, which is it's actually really, there's really so many positives that I see, things that have happened in the last 15 years with so much collective work. And so there's a lot of writers, but there's also people doing those other roles, whether, in the editing and publishing world. And there's also this field of like curating, which I think has been really important, which I've done through being like guest editor for publications or anthologies, different events, or people asking you for recommendations, and like bringing people together in certain gatherings, whether they're on the page or off the page. And I know that social media is also a part of that. I'm not someone who's doing that social media stuff, but I know, Sandy, you do it to an incredible effect, of like,
or the opposite.
No, I will not let you know. I think I see that you're amplifying voices and bringing people together and showing that we're not this thing. I think like people that are like outside of our communities, they'll reach for the same names all the time.
Yeah.
But we sort of just keep giving them other names, and
that's what we wanted to also really say to you and the other people that we've spoken to, because I think that sometimes you get exceptionalized into that space, but actually what we ended up doing was speaking to people who do community in their practice. So it wasn't the extracting stars or whatever, or extracting names or any of that. It, even in the way that people responded to the survey, people were talking not about a list of names and people that they just keep thinking about. They were responding to something that was absolutely talking about who connects up. And that was really interesting, because at first we thought we were just looking at individual artists, who make, and then we'd have a list, and then we'd have it couldn't have gotten more colonial than that. This notion of the good list, or the featured artist, or the, all of this kind of exceptionalizing, but also, something that just extracts people from the community in which they're operating anyway. So, and I think publishers or like various different spaces can do that with people too, and the media definitely does it. And it's just like, it's dangerous for a lot of reasons, but also it's not even just that it's dangerous or whatever. It can happen, and that's fine, but it's just not where people live.
No, absolutely not. It's stagnant. Yeah, it doesn't reflect the sort of conversations that are happening, and it's just so much more richer when we can live in a society that amplifies multiple voices.
Yeah, and I think it gives people an option of kind of seeing our successes and our failures, and our, I don't know, like all the things in between as well. Yeah.
It's not just Black excellence. It's,
yeah. It's not just, queer joy or pride or whatever. It's like, it's the equal opposite, and it's also the stuff that's in between that we live in, which I think, I've kind of been really concerned about the way that memoir is used as this, particularly across like queer lives, as this kind of measure of success or persistence or endurance or something. What I really love about the way that you've brought yourself into those spaces, I was talking about the Chermy poem, but just thinking really generally about your work, is that it does it sometimes in a really pedestrian way. Sorry, that sounds like an insult.
No, please call me pedestrian.
No, never. But spending time in the everyday is something that is so powerful in. If all we're seeing is these occasional bits of thinking about like Indigenous queerness, if all we're seeing is these bits of that experience, if we're just seeing like a profile, it's not enough. It's just not enough. We did this TV survey We had about 1,500 responses to asking about queer TV. And one of the reasons that we did TV is because it's episodic. So you have spend time with characters. But what a lot of people told us is that they actually don't have enough time with the queer characters. And for queer Indigenous characters, using Indigenous like in that international context or, and then people would get specific. It's not enough. There's not enough out there. So when people say, oh, but there's this, what we were actually hearing from people is that they wanted to spend more time. I don't think that's just about the inclusion of a character or having a quick arc or something that's very big moment. I think it's about the everyday of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, people explicitly said that it's about kind of like the expansiveness of experience and less box checking and more possibility.
Yeah. If I could go back to the Chermy poem and the idea of pedestrianness or something, I'm going to bring Destiny Deacon into this because she just talked a lot about just making in her living room, just sitting on her lounge and thinking a lot, and just using everyday things that she would find that might have been discarded or people would give her. And I think about that a lot in relation to my own practice, just being in my house, just being around, my family, my friends, just doing, very everyday banal things that actually can really, spark my writing. But then, potentially that also is just relating to everyone else who's, just being in their living rooms, So I think about that a lot.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. I can't imagine doing, there's people who say you wake up every morning and write from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock and then you have some fantastic activity and then you've got something to write about in the next day. This kind of notion of the kind of separation of that, but also the idea of it being something that's separate to the world that you're experiencing, but you sort of peer into it rather than, is something that I always struggle with it because I'm not the sort of writer in my own, even in writing research, who can say that they're going to sit down every morning and just write for 3 hours or 10 hours or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I can't do schedule like that. No, it's just moves around whatever else is going on in my life for sure. Yeah.
And maybe that's something there's still a lot of judgment around that. There's still this, especially from people my age, I hear it, I should say, from people my age, this kind of idea of if you don't put the work in, you don't get the results. It's this sort of, and it's well, we can all put the work in, whatever that means, but also it's a fascinating idea that nothing good can come from not leisure time, but sort of time reflecting.
Absolutely, yeah. But that's that's where most of the work is happening for sure.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as blackfellas, as queer mob, we're always gonna have to push against those stereotypes of what an artist is meant to be doing or what that work is meant to be looking like. And there's always going to be attempts to underestimate us, in what we do. Yeah, it's annoying, but it's also kind of fun to play with expectations of what a writer's meant to be doing, looking like, whatever. I see that happening a lot. I did study creative writing, so I am kind of in some ways have some sort of formal training in writing, and that can be useful, but then it cannot be useful as well.
Yeah.
And I think if people want to sort of say that I'm not a professional writer, I kind of think I'm oh, well, maybe I want to deprofessionalize that. Maybe I want to sort of take all of that stuff and throw it out the window and just be really grounded in the here and now. Yeah.
I think it's really powerful, but there's also there's such an overemphasis on the kind of I guess what we think of as the monochronic of the colonial project, so that idea that a timeline can only exist in one path and it can't, like we often use Visner's idea, who's an Anishinaabe scholar, who talks about Indigenous survivance as this idea of if you exist now, you existed in the past, you'll exist in the future. And it kind of buys into a bit of the polychronic of our real lives, which is that they kind of have these events that overlap and I think about it as like a gigging artist. And weirdly enough, as a researcher, we have some of the same things, and
increasingly.
Yeah, increasingly. So there's like these multiple competing ideas and they're not competing. They're kind of complementary. They sift in, sift out. But, obviously it's still this persistent idea of the monochronic, or that idea of a singular timeline being right. And yet we live in these existences where I loved what you were talking about with going to places, specific places, and spending time there, and those spaces that are, resonant for you become part of how you know the world.
Absolutely, yeah. I go back to the same shopping centre that my grandmother and her children and my mum and her brothers and sisters and my cousins spend so much time in. And there's really there's so much about like tracing back one's steps or tracing back the steps of our ancestors and our family members or old people and finding ourselves in that multi-time. It's something that can just spark so much for me. It never ever feels stagnant or I'm doing the same thing again like that. It always feels there's both an oldness and a newness to doing that.
That was a lovely message in Swim, actually, as well. I mean, interestingly, you're talking about it in relation to your practice, but it's there in relation to the reflections on the body and the kind of remembering the things that you love about something and reclaiming those things, whether it's the body or a practice like swimming, or, whether it's sovereign right or, I don't know, this knowledge that, that you have a right to exist and make in these spaces and that other people will be interested in it is like the hope. And obviously, as artists, we're never really sure whether that's going to be, but also there's opportunity for failure and response with that as well, If you don't get it out, you don't know.
I was going to say, what do you mean by failure? Because it seems like something that keeps coming up for you, that you keep mentioning.
I think I've been thinking about it a lot in terms of this idea of queer failure. I mean, Halberstam writes about it a bit, but I think there's somebody else who writes about it as well, Han?
I think probably...
No, anyway.
Tino, is it?
Yes, yeah. But beyond that, what that did was sparked in me this kind of idea of something not working for you. Yeah. I don't even mean like failure in the sense of something being published and then nobody reading it or nobody, it's not that, because that's a thing, sure. But I think that idea of being able to, not having to kind of either pitch success or, being able to exist in the world regardless of how people regard. And I think there's some real power in that. And it's taken me a long time to kind of work out that can work for me. Yeah. But some of it is what other people would think of as literal failure. Like it's not being able to do a thing that you think you might have been able to do. And I think for for some of the emerging writers that you're working with, that process of finding, sorry, I'm just going to use that daggy term of finding your voice. But I kind of mean all of the things that it can be for people, of just working out how to say the thing that you feel like you need to say or want to say, or that you want to have a conversation with someone about. For me, a lot of the failures like that have been when it hasn't been in conversation. Where it's just been me going, other people need to know this.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And I don't see that I think one of the really powerful things about your work is, and this is why we come back to even though a lot of it has been written, separately or singularly authored, if you like. It still feels like it can't happen without other people. And that's not always the case with writers.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a curious one because I also need periods of isolation.
Of course.
Which I think probably a lot of writers do, hey, where I'll just have to be by myself for hours or days on end to sort of really dig into that, narrative voice or whatever it is. But yeah, like I said, at the same time, what's sort of underpinning everything is all my connections, all my relations, past, present, future. Yeah, it's interesting, sort of being both alone but never alone kind of feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. The alone and never alone stuff is really lovely. And I think I've seen it across, I'm not trying to kind of draw it into the idea that queer mob are doing this more than others, but I'm seeing often that people are articulating a need to take themselves away from not harms or anything like that, because it's quite the opposite, like surround yourself with people who love you, just do that, and then you don't have necessarily those same harms. But I think being able to understand that there are these impositions that come from outside and that escaping them can actually allow you to make a space for the making. Sorry, I'm probably reflecting on my own.
No, that's exactly how I feel, yeah.
Yeah. And I live by myself, so for me, most of my time is alone time. So people often say I talk a lot, but that's because I don't talk very much actually at all, as it turns out.
Do you sort of talk to yourself as you sort of are in those alone spaces?
Not often. I used to a lot more, but not often. And I'm not sure why, but I also think that as I've gotten older, I want to save up the time.
Save up your talking time. Yeah, for sure.
Save up my talking time and use the other stuff as my thinking time. But I'm very interested in that, this idea that I think for writers in particular, writers like yourself, who are making this work that has to tap into the public imaginary in some way, or, for people for there to be an audience for it. But I'd also say there's, of course, an audience for it, because audience is so frequently treated in industry as like the other. There's the maker and then there's the audience, and then they're separated by the production of whatever the material is. And I keep coming back to, I see a blending of that with your work. Even I don't know where it came from, but the desire to do swim, or the reality of doing it, is a kind of, it's its own sort of blending because of the different form.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Which is amazing. I think we wanted to really ask you a question around heat and light. One of the things that you have mentioned just in this discussion is that queer mob don't always have the luxury of looking back and reflecting, and that sometimes when they're going to do this writing, they've done that. But you've got a 15-year kind of body of work that you've developed. And when I think about heat and light, we wonder what it means to kind of return to that and to think about that time in your life, and largely because it is being still taught.
Yeah, thanks. So I had, a few weeks ago, I did a guest lecture, my book, Heat and Light's being taught at different universities and I think in some schools as well, but this was for university first year students. Yeah, going back into thinking about that book and, just a little sort of a dates-wise, I think I was probably about 19 when I started writing that book, and finished it when I was maybe like 22, and then it came out when I was 23, and I'm now about to turn 35. So it's kind of, it's a long time. It's a long enough time to sort of, when I'm there at the, in the lecture theatre, and then, I'm sort of asked to read a part of the book, and I open the book and there's this sense of like, Oh, I don't quite remember where I was when I wrote, like it's bits and pieces. Your memory's like bits and pieces. Like this particular section, I don't remember writing, but, sometimes you'll flick through and you'll be like, yep, I do remember where I was when I wrote that. So it's like, then you're reading your own work and you're feeling a certain disembodiment, so it's kind of hilarious. And then the students themselves were so receptive. I couldn't believe it because I'd also, had a period of being in isolation where I had just been, working from home. And then, these young people, they are reading it for the first time and they are in it for the first time. And I spent a long time afterwards signing books and having conversations with them, which I wasn't expecting. I was expecting I would just, that there wouldn't be any interest in students wanting to talk to me personally. And, a few of them were saying that there was two Indigenous people in the class and then just a lot of queer and trans mob. And they were, just sort of saying, well, no, I don't really get that many opportunities to read queer writing. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think I hoped that, that they wouldn't be saying that to me. But I think it is true that there's still, certainly there is more queer writing taught than when I was going through uni, but there's still a lack. And they were saying that how it felt so fresh for them. And then I was sort of thinking, well, that's actually a really good sign for me as a writer for a book that I wrote over 10 years ago to feel really fresh. And so in some ways a sort of stroke of luck to still be reaching an audience, but it also like sort of proves that there's, for a lot of us in the margins, there's still, we're still relegated to the margins and that we're not seeing ourselves, we're not where we should be. So, it was interesting. And then the lecturer said to me, well, we've been teaching this book for 5 years and this will probably be the last year. So there's also that feeling of like, there's also there's time limits, but there's also, the lifespan of a book can be so many different things. So I was really buoyed by that experience with the students. And I also reflected on how I've been very lucky that book has had two formats, in that when it was first published, it was published with a certain jacket and a certain blurb. And then I think 2 years ago, the First Nations Classics series happened, which was an initiative out of UQP with Yasmin Smith, who's my old friend. As a coincidence, we went to QUT together as a series editor of the First Nations Classics, and they asked me who I wanted to intro the book. So each of the newly launched, the old books that have been, had kind of like a facelift or something. They have these introductions by other Aboriginal writers or Torres Strait Islander writers contextualising the book. And they also have a new design by Jeanine Leane, who's a queer Larrakia artist who's really deadly.
It's such a beautiful collection. It's really interesting how that puts these different works and different writers in conversation too. Yeah,
it's exactly kind of what I was thought of kind of like being getting at in some ways, where it really shifted for me because I thought about when the book first came out and I felt a sense of that people really jumped on the idea of like, oh, this is a queer Indigenous work, and like how there wasn't, that people sort of, it was just such a different time back then in terms of there wasn't that many writers that were being invited to writers' festivals and that sort of thing. And like sometimes you found yourself being the only one at the table, which is I never want to be, to having this series of work coming out so you feel like you're part of a collective, but then also having the opportunity to rewrite the blurb, because one of the things that the publisher wanted to put at the back of the book that I just didn't have the experience or felt like I could have a voice about it, but they put the word myth, like they put mythological on the, like to describe what the book was like, which is just, such a red flag word.
Totally. Quite.
And of course, it just wouldn't fly today. So I was able to sort of change that. Then I was able to, just have Alison write a beautiful introduction to it. And Alison being queer, Jenna being queer, like, yeah, it just felt like I was wrapped up in this sort of like safety blanket of queer blackness. And so that's really helped me feel connected to the book again.
That's really special. And it reminds me of one of your poems in Throat, where you both speak about that sense of isolation, but also do a lot of it's a kind of projection forward of a remembering of all of the queer Aboriginal creatives that kind of came before. In The Only Black Queer in the World is the name of the poem, where you talk about not having yet read Lisa Bellier or seen Stephen Oliver or seen a doco on Uncle Jack Charles or, so many others who have, both come before and that you didn't have access to or hadn't encountered before that time. And the feeling of aloneness, and then realizing that you were never alone, I guess, in that identity. And it wasn't the isolation that, while the experience of the isolation was very real, that it was a kind of manufactured isolation.
Absolutely, 100% manufactured. Yeah. I think
this obsession of the colony with like firsts of breaking new ground, of discovering, of planting the flag, of claiming ownership of a space, because only one person can really have that. It's really toxic to, especially younger queer mob and people feeling super alone in their own experiences.
Yeah, and the colony has such a short memory as well, because they'll forget the queer Indigenous writer that 20 years ago, they'll just be, sort of like looking back. If I look back at like Vivian Cleven's work, she read a book called Biting Back, which I think came out in 2000. And it had elements of like playing with gender in there. And there was, bunch of queer writers doing things, but for some reason, like, I think it's a marketing tool or something.
It feels like a media connected idea, but it's also like, it's frustrating when any of us pick it up as well. And it's why the project that we're doing is called Saving Lives, because it's recall, it's the recalling, it's the remembering of this work. And I love that, you've just talked about the recall of this and a reflection on what it means now when you look back on this work. And I'd forgotten actually, until Han just mentioned Throat, how much that was, I bet other people have the same feeling, how much that was incredibly powerful during a time when I felt really isolated. It really spoke to me. And I kind of forgot about, until just now, how I needed to read it. And I wonder if other people feel the same way about your work. I mean, we know that some other people have told us that they feel that way about your work, but I wonder how you feel about the fact that we feel that way.
Oh, well, I love it. It's overwhelming. I don't know what to say. It just, touches me for sure. Maybe makes me think that I can keep going.
I'm glad that's the response, not pressure. I mean, maybe it's pressure too, but it's this whole timeline thing that we were talking about too can so often be about, well, the timeline is that the deadline is here and we have to meet that deadline of, publication or of performance or of delivery of some idea that pushes delivery. And for some of us that works, or for some of us that works sometimes. But it's also really interesting to think about the things that pop up without it, and I think it's almost counter to the idea of how these timelines work, that ideas come to us regardless of, the need or imperative for it. There's almost not a language for that beyond the kind of artists are creative and think creatively, beyond the sort of idea of a disruption. And I wonder, in light of that, if you can share anything that you're working on now, and what you're thinking about or excited by, even other people's work.
Yeah, there's a few things that I've been working on. I'm always working on too many things at once, which maybe is just my style. And then sometimes it takes, years for things to surface because of that. But one of those things is completed, which is a children's book, which will come out next year, will be 2026, which is for a middle grade audience, or 12 to 16, or whoever wants to read it, really. But the characters themselves are 12 and 13 and going through a tricky period. I wrote this book, the more recent draft of this book, because it's gone through very many variations, but one of the drafts I wrote during the 2023 referendum, and it was a time where so many things were amplified. And so I'm writing about online bullying, and these characters they're going through, online bullying themselves, but it's under the backdrop of everything that was happening online during that time. And it's really came out of a lot of conversations, but also, from some of my friends that are parents who were like, how can I explain this to my kid? It was such a dark period, I think, for us. And I think there's still a lot of reflecting to go on. It's also, of course, it's always about beautiful things in life as well, like the relationship with grandmother and country and friendship, and the relationship between two cousins as both cousins but best friends. And so that'll come out. It's called Ruby's Web, and it'll come out 2026 with Magabala Books. And then I've just been writing poems and writing fiction, and then hoping that sometimes I get stuck and I have to sort of go for walks or swims and have conversations and then go back to it. One of the things I was thinking about before I was talking to you both, because, you sent me some points to reflect on and think about before this conversation. And I was thinking about, particularly that time when Heat and Light came out, and how, I was 23, that's an age where I don't think many of us have figured out everything, well, it'd be extraordinary if we did,
Yeah.
And one of the things that I hadn't come to that realization that I was trans then. I hadn't got my autistic diagnosis, and that those are two things that, knowing that I'm autistic and trans have been two things that have really made me understand myself so much more, and given myself so much more empathy, oh gosh, I remember doing writers' festivals and things, and not, why are they asking those questions, that I'd be getting these questions that just seemed so open-ended and broad, but at the same time, I could feel the expectation of a really specific answer. I could feel claustrophobic around what people wanted me to say. And, I think definitely the struggle was real. I think now understanding myself better, and through being neurodiverse, being trans, giving myself that grace, really leaning into writing about that, being really, really good, and just connecting with so many people that have similar experiences has been really awesome. So writing poetry and fiction about some of that stuff, and trying to find a way to sort of feel like it's all coming together, which it always does. I think sometimes we just kind of want to be like, I'm not one thing, I'm so many things. And then we just look at the work and realize it's about so many things, and that's okay. Maybe we can take on those outside expectations and be like, oh, I should be this or should be that, but actually seeing it play out in the page in real time and taking that judgment away has been really good.
It's such a powerful message.
Yeah.
I do mean message. I'm unapologetic about the way that this kind of flags, I don't know, not so much endorsement as just experience, just to go, this is actually the experience of us as neurodivergent people who are, trans, who are trying to make sense of the world, but also the world needs to make sense of us. It's not the other way around.
Yeah, that's true.
I loved that idea that Heat and Light, in spite of you not knowing necessarily those things about yourself, because again, do we at different times, that, in returning to it, there are still these resonances in the work for you now. And I think there was two things I was thinking about with that. One was just the comment earlier about it and thinking about the idea that something that's come out over a decade ago is still really important for people. It's like nobody says this about Dickens. Nobody's saying this about this, the dead white guys.
That's true.
And I think this has its power in the moment in time as well. So it doesn't even have to relate to now or, into the future. It doesn't have to do that. And it doesn't have to do it not just because of the polychromatics of it all, but also, because it exists there as part of this remarkable way that you have thought through this, and other people get an opportunity to kind of see into that in this, in this text. And there's that, but also, this I think there'll be a lot of resonances for people hearing this around neurodivergence and around intersections of those divergences, basically, are around not just knowing who we are, but also not having the same expectations. Like the problem that you identified was a problem of someone asking a closed-off question, a problem, and also the expectations around that. And I think if they haven't changed, they should.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
This is a much more interesting conversation to me than a lot of the kind of asked and answered, because who cares about an asked and answered, Who cares about a list of questions? So we gave you a list of questions, but, who cares about a list of questions that are answered? It's really about having conversations that expand beyond the potential, and it's not about coming up with correct answers with any of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's still there a lot. There's still these expectations that there will be models presented. The more things that we are.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Not really, But again, this is a little bit about the queer memoir, is that it's like the model of how you live your life to be successful. Yeah. Look, I got through this, I endured. And it's kind of, we're enduring in multiple ways, I guess, or not. I like the lack of judgment on the presentation of that as something just a little bit more complex. But yeah, sorry, that was a bit rambly. But
I really appreciate that. Yeah.
I think what's fascinating, and I hope people listening to this feel the same way, but it just makes me want to read all of your stuff immediately, which I'm not allowed to do because we've got other work to do. But it makes me want to rethink some of it as well, or give it to my brain again to have a read of. And I think that's the joy of being able to engage, especially with things like, printed form work.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I love how your reiterating those don't have to have a shelf life. That's good. Works with Dickens. It could work for me. Things live on, yeah. And, the book that I keep returning to, Lisa Belair, Dreaming in Urban Areas, either 1996 or 1998, that book is so powerful. I kind of wish I would have been around when Lisa was around and could have conversations, and Destiny too. But then, I yarn with Lisa's cousin Kim a lot, and, she sort of signed this card to me recently that said, "Keep on dreaming." And so even though I didn't know Lisa, she just, really feels like she lives in me in some way. I love that book. So I just wanted to shout out Lisa, and shout out to anyone who's listening to this as, going through your own thing. Just give yourself grace. We're understanding so much about ourselves every day, and that helps us moving forward.
God, that's amazing. I think that idea of grace is just incredibly powerful. I love the message of that, because I think when I used to hear things like giving yourself grace, I always thought it was letting myself off the hook about something, instead of it being far more far deeper and more expansive and more positively charged or something, you know, like it's not just going, you're okay, you're not the worst. It's going, actually, how would you extend this to others? You know,
Yeah.
do you feel
like, well, how would you talk to your best friend or your loved one? Yeah, offering them that same compassion that you can extend to yourself, for sure. It's been so nice chatting to you both.
Oh, same here. Same
talking, and hopefully we'll keep talking about stuff in the future. Well, I know we will. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Evie, and it's just been so wonderful to have this conversation with you.
What an amazing way to kick off a day where there's a lot of bringing things together. This has been really powerful in that, so thanks. Thanks for my professional development. You've been listening to EVN, Sandy O'Sullivan and Han Reardon-Smith on the Queer As podcast. Queer As is part of the Saving Lives research program that recalls and centres the power of queer Indigenous artistic thinking and creativity. This anti-colonial podcast is sponsored by the Australian Research Council and in partnership with Indigenous X and the Centre for Global Indigenous Futures. To find out more about EVN's work, please go to the Queer As website, that's queer-as.org, where you'll find links to their work and the work of other queer Indigenous artists, as well as Black academics with a Q and Indigiqueers with a capital Queer.